out there, and it would be my interest is to tease it out and ask really what is this breathing exercise doing? And that gives you kind of a level of understanding that goes beyond just teaching breathing, because then you have a repertoire of different exercises that you can use with your clients whenever you need to use them for whatever specific situations. And breathing should be that. So let's do just a very basic kind of 2 minutes. Well, I don't know if I can access my whiteboard, so it may not or may not happen. So it seems to be a different, okay, it's not going to happen, but I'll talk you through it. Fundamentally, with breathing, you have an inspiration, you have an expiration. That's what you're working with. And with that, you can talk about speeding up your breathing. So you're breathing faster. So you take more breaths per minute. That's typically regarded as a stressor, irrespective of the tidal volume. It's never just, breathing is never just about the respiratory rate. You also have tidal volume, which is the volume of air that you draw into your lungs during that time. You could breathe a light breath. So in other words, you have a reduced tidal volume. You're taking in a shorter breath. You're taking less air into your lungs. Or you could breathe in a full breath. You could fill your lungs. You could take in 200 mil, or you could take in 2 or 3 liters. That's the difference in terms of tidal volume. With the respiratory rate, you could slow down your breathing right down to 1 breath per minute, or you could speed it up to 30 breaths per minute. So whatever you do with that, whether it's the respiratory rate or tidal volume, is going to influence your breathing from a biochemical point of view, either one way or the other. If you breathe faster, you breathe harder, that's going to cause hyperventilation, and that's going to be a stressor. There's a reduction of blood flow to the brain, there's a reduction of oxygen delivery to the brain, and you put the body and mind into a stress response. And that can be very good for people in terms of releasing emotions, releasing trauma, and having, bring stuff up to the surface that might have been buried for quite some time. Now, conversely, you can do the opposite. And that's what we will be practicing today, is breathing a little bit less air. And that's what got me into breathing, because I could feel my blood circulation improving. I could feel that was activating the relaxation response. And I never realized back then, that was 25 years ago, that if you breathe a little bit less air, you can influence blood flow to the brain by about 9%. And that's not an overstatement. And even all of these exercises, they carry into physical exercise. So the whole aspect about breathing is having that basic understanding of it. Now, of course, we talked about respiratory rate. You could breathe faster, it's a stressor. You could breathe slower, you induce relaxation. You could breathe harder. That typically will more likely to be a stressor because of the loss of carbon dioxide. Or you could breathe lighter. That's typically inducing relaxation. Another aspect about breathing is breath holding. You could hold your breath at the top of an inhale, or you could hold your breath at the bottom of an exhale. 2 different breath holds. You could hold your breath for a short period of time, or you could hold your breath for a long period of time. And then finally, you can breathe in and out through your nose, or in through your nose and out through your mouth, or in and out through your mouth. Or you could breathe high in the upper chest, or you could breathe low with good recruitment of the diaphragm. That's it when it comes to breathing. There's no other options. And I've just listed off about 10 different options there. And you can have any breathing exercise in the world. All breathing exercises will fall into that. And if you understand what each one is doing, you can combine breathing exercises. You can create new breathing exercises, but you'll also understand what a breathing exercise is doing, because very often in breathing, people focus on slowing down the respiratory rate. They don't necessarily talk about tidal volume. I could ask a person to breathe slower, but in the process, they take full breaths. They end up hyperventilating. They feel dizzy. They feel lightheaded, and it's doing the absolute opposite to what we intend. And breathing has also changed over the years. I spent a couple of years writing a book, Breathing for Yoga. And we looked at the original breathing in yoga that was espoused by the original yogi masters. It wasn't about taking full deep breaths. It wasn't about taking full big breaths. It was about breathing light. It was about breathing subtle. It was about conservation of the breath. But breathing in yoga, new ideas came into being in the 1880s in Europe. People were dying with tuberculosis, and there was a hygiene movement at the time. And the idea at the time was that if you took full deep breaths, germs would not spread throughout the lungs. And this is where the full deep breaths were born. But if we're encouraging people to take full deep breaths, we have to be asking the question, what exactly is this doing? Is it increasing oxygen delivery throughout the body? Is it increasing and improving blood circulation? Is it inducing relaxation? Or could it be having the opposite? So this is where, when you think about breathing, what you're doing on one side, you have to ask the question, what's happening on the other? And it's coming back down to that. Now, I don't want to make breathing complicated. It's not. Like, really, when you break it down, it is not complicated. But understanding the basic principles can be quite important. So I will look through functional breathing. We will look through the stressor exercises. I will have you do breathing exercises. And for me, breathing is absolutely so powerful. I give a talk at the Health Optimization Summit on either Saturday or Sunday. And my whole emphasis is, this is a biohacking event. And of course, biohackers are very interested in longevity and health and performance, mental and physical. But I'm going to focus on the heart and the brain, the two vital organs in the human body. And if you consider nutrition or physical exercise or sleep or breathing, of those four basic and most important functions in human health, which function has the greatest impact on the brain and on the heart? Is it sleep? Is it nutrition? Is it physical exercise? Or is it respiration? And the answer is respiration. And I'm not saying that without a foundation, because you can literally influence blood flow and oxygen delivery to those organs. And if you think of the human brain is very, very hungry for oxygen. It's about 2% of our body weight, but it consumes 20% of our oxygen. Now, if we have reduced blood flow to the brain, as in the case of somebody getting into a stressful situation, and they start breathing a bit faster and a bit harder, and that in turn blows off a little bit too much carbon dioxide, there's going to be a reduction of blood flow to the brain, possibly 10 or 20% reduction of blood flow to the brain. Brain cells become overly excited, and we can't think straight. So in various situations, how many of your students and clients unknowingly, in the belief that if they take full deep breaths, there's more oxygen being delivered throughout the body, is doing the opposite to what they are looking for? So that's what we want to tease out. Okay. There will be plenty of time for questions, but I'm going to start in the PowerPoint. So, I suppose when it comes down to breathing, we have to think of it in the same vein as a personal trainer. And I'm talking about a good personal trainer. I have a personal trainer. This guy knows his stuff. He's got a technical expertise. He knows beyond what he's learned, of course, at university. He's continuous learning. He's really able to communicate the information to me. He's able to motivate me, to hold me accountable, to adapt the exercise according to what I can do. And he's doing that with his clients. And breathing instructors should be no different. We also should have a technical expertise. We should know the science. If we're teaching something that's so powerful in the human body, it's very important that we know exactly what that is doing. Yes, you could argue that the science is still catching up. It's correct. But the basic physiology of breathing has been around for a long time. Since 1904, if you look at the Bohr effect, that the release of oxygen from the red blood cells is influenced by the presence of carbon dioxide and resultant blood pH. So we know that red blood cells give off oxygen or release oxygen to the tissues and organs in the presence of a slight increase of carbon dioxide, which in turn causes a slight drop to blood pH, and hemoglobin, which is the main carrier of oxygen in the blood, gives off oxygen more readily. That's just physiology. So knowing that information, then, we can influence whether we're going to reduce oxygen delivery to the working muscles, reduce oxygen delivery to the organs, or to increase it. So we have to think that it's never just one breathing exercise. Breathing in for 4 and holding for 7, breathing out for 8, breathing in for 4, out for 6, in for 3, out for 5, doing hyperventilation, doing long breath holds. Who are you working with? Is that person able? Is it having the intended consequences? Could you be pushing them too hard? It's like a personal trainer coming in and overdoing it. And I'm sure some of them do it. I'd like you to give this a go. This is the body oxygen level test. Some of you will be familiar with it. What does it tell you? It gives you some feedback of your functional breathing patterns. I'm going to take the cameras off you because if you're, say, working with healthcare and you're wondering, how well is my student breathing? How well is the client in front of me breathing? Could their breathing patterns be holding this person back? What's a simple screening tool to assess their breathing? The BOLT score is. So what I would like you to do, I've taken the camera off you. Nobody can see what you get. So give it a go. All you need is a timer. You have your phone, you have your watch. And the instruction is as follows. Take a normal breath in and out through your nose and pinch your nose and hold your nose and time it in seconds. How long can you hold your breath for until you feel the first definite desire to breathe? In other words, it's not the maximum length of your breath whole time. It's the length of time that you can hold your breath for and still have normal breathing when you resume breathing. Now, I'm going to come back to this because this is quite interesting. So, say, for example, you are a personal trainer and you're working with a student, but your student is overly breathless during physical exercise. And you're wondering, why might this be? Is this due to poor conditioning on the student's behalf, or could something else be going on? What drives your breathing? What causes you to take each breath? And what influences how fast and how hard you breathe? So I came into breathing about 25 years ago. Like many people who come into breathing, you come into it because of your own issues. I had asthma, I had a stuffy nose, I had very poor sleep quality. It's so common. I'm not unique. I was just lucky enough to find a technique that worked, and did work. And it wasn't about breathing more air. It was about breathing less. It wasn't about breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. It was about breathing in and out through the nose. In actual fact, it was learning a breathing technique that was undoing the bad habits that I had developed as a young kid, as a teenager, and as a young adult. Because we as human beings, our ancestors knew well how to breathe. They had functional breathing patterns. But of course, we lost that because of the influences of modern life. It changed our breathing patterns and it didn't change our breathing for the better. I think it's really important that you understand what you're doing when it comes to breathing. It gives you a confidence. It allows you to adapt the techniques. So 25 years of experience. I've written 11 books. I'm just completing a book on sleep, and that's 100,000 words. And, I suppose it just shows you the connection between breathing and recovery. And even say, for example, athletes who have poor sleep. Athletes who have poor sleep quality don't recover well. They're more prone to injury. They've also cognitive dysfunction. So if your interest was accessing flow states, and then you asked a question, well, how can I get my student to access flow states? We have to think about breathing, because breathing is influencing sleep. Breathing is influencing state of mind. Breathing is influencing the autonomic nervous system, and breathing is influencing recovery. And if we're in a balanced state of mind and a balanced autonomic nervous system, we can access flow. So we have a vibrant community. About 13,000 professionals have completed the courses over the years, and we have millions of users, people who have been reading the books and doing our training. And we are one of the bigger schools in the world when it comes to breathing. We possibly are one of the biggest in terms of the numbers of people who have been through our program. And of course, that information feeds into us, which is good. We adapt to, and that's the thing about the oxygen advantage. It's not a static technique. It's a technique that's not based on tradition. I actually brought it out for men back in 2013, even though I was working with breathing since 2002, because I was giving courses for anxiety, bringing together functional breathing and mindfulness. And I had about 3,000 people do the program in Ireland. This was from 2010 to 2013. Very few men would attend. And I kept on wondering, men are lost in thinking. They are overthinking. They're stressed. Their sleep is impacted. And there was a lot of mental health issues going on with men, but yet they wouldn't turn up to a breathing class. So that's why I developed Oxygen Advantage. It was a performance-based technique, mental and physical performance. Men would come in the door, and when they come in the door, it's all about mind, body, and sport, getting people out of their heads, getting people to be able to develop and strengthen their ability to hold attention. Because if you can strengthen your ability to hold attention on one thing, you've got control over the mind. This goes beyond mindfulness. It's not easy to be mindful when the mind is all over the place. It's not easy to be mindful when sleep is not good. It's not easy to be mindful when we're in a state of chronic hyperventilation and when our body is continuously feeding into the brain that we're under threat. So there's a few main pillars of it, but the pillars here are functional breathing, which is your everyday breathing patterns. And, you can improve your blood circulation with functional breathing. Or if I put it this way, if you have dysfunctional breathing, you're more likely to have cold hands, cold feet, and brain fog. And we have 50,000 miles of blood vessels throughout the human body, which we can influence. We can influence oxygen delivery. We can influence movement because of the stabilization of the spine by better recruitment of the diaphragm. And of course, then we have breathing for yoga instructor training there as well, which is encompassed in functional breathing patterns. Our advanced then includes the tools to perform under pressure. So it's very much accessing flow states, really bringing in stressor exercises in sports to cause adaptations such as reduced lactic acid, increased buffering capacity. And so the functional breathing is your everyday breathing. And breathing for yoga is bringing functional breathing and the science into yoga practice. So if you're a yoga instructor and you have a student who comes in with asthma, what breathing exercise could you give that person? If they have panic disorder, if they have anxiety, if they have poor sleep, if they have insomnia, if they're overly breathless during practice, and also bring breathing off the mat. There's more to be learned by that student. So if a student comes into a yoga class, yes, you give the instruction in the class, but more importantly is, how is your student breathing when they leave you? How are they breathing for the 24/7, before they come into the next class? Because then you're really giving them something tangible. And of course, yoga is absolutely an amazing modality. But in terms of breathing, and breathing could be the foundation in yoga, that can be adapted. And I think it can be adapted to better suit our modern living. If you are considering to be a breathing instructor, we would love to teach you. We have very accessible and affordable courses, in terms of level 1, which is functional breathing. In US dollars, it's $396. That's all recorded. In Australian, it's $559. And that's if you use the discount below. So the discount is a 20% discount, and it's fitness 20. So you see it down below in the slide. And then the advanced is basically everything. So that's everything that's online, plus 7 by 2-hour sessions with myself. And that then the advanced is, you can see also the discount there. The price is $876, or Australian is 1,279 Australian when you use that code. I'm going to start off with simple breathing exercises. I'm going to start off with a very simple exercise to decongest the nose, and then we will do breathe light. And then I'll go through a few more slides, and then we'll do some breath holds that you could do during physical exercise as a stressor. So early on at the start, I was saying you could do breath holds, and you could hold your breath at the top of a breath or at the bottom of the breath. Typically, if you hold the breath at the bottom of a breath, in other words, you exhale normally, then you do a breath hold. And if you hold your breath for a short period of time, it induces relaxation. So it's considered to be an extension of the exhalation. So if you think of inspiration, drawing air into the lungs, and during expiration, we're allowing the air to leave the body effortlessly. The ideal ratio of the expiration to the inspiration is about 2 times, or 1.5 times to 2 times. So in other words, the length of your expiration, the length of your exhalation should be about 1.5 to 2 times the length of your inspiration. If you have a slow, relaxed exhalation, you signal to the brain that the body is safe. If you breathe out fast, you're telling the brain that you're under stress. So if you're doing a breathing technique that involves fast breathing, irrespective of the tidal volume, you're still going to be stressing the body and mind. So we do an exhale, hold. It's a very short period of time here. It's going to induce relaxation. This is a very useful exercise if you have a lot of mind activity going on. So, whenever you have a lot of mind activity going on and your head is feeling heavy and you want to have to bring some relief to that, hold your breath. It's not easy to be mindful or even pay attention to your breath, when the mind is all over the place. It's a lot easier to simply hold your breath. And as you hold your breath, you do stimulate the vagus nerve, but you're also increasing blood flow to the brain. So let's go with this simple exercise. This is called breathing recovery. So whenever you're ready, I'd like you to give it a go. It's really about the experience of it. take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your breath for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let go, but breathe in through your nose and breathe normal for about 10 to 15 seconds. So you're breathing normal for 10 to 15 seconds. And again, take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let go, but breathe in through your nose and breathe normal for about 10 to 15 seconds. So again, this is your emergency exercise. This is your way of telling the brain that you're safe. That's all your brain wants. And again, take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let go, but breathe in through your nose and breathe normal for 10 to 15 seconds. So you're just breathing normal for 10 to 15 seconds. And again, take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let go, but breathe in through your nose and breathe normal for 10 to 15 seconds. So you will see there's some similarities with that and box breathing. Box breathing is also known as tactical breathing. It's something that would be used by, say, for example, people going in special ops, going into very difficult situations. They want to have balance of the autonomic nervous system. And box breathing is you're breathing in for 4 and holding for 4 seconds, and you're breathing out for 4 and holding for 4. There's a breath hold at the top of inspiration, which is a slight stressor, and there's a breath hold at the bottom of the expiration, which is down regulation. So that's where it's helping to bring balance. But when you're holding the breath at the end of the exhalation, it's only down regulation. So again, take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let go, but breathe in through your nose and breathe normal for 10 to 15 seconds. I'm going to lengthen this breath hold, and this is a technique that will help to decongest your nose. So when you hold your breath for a longer period of time, and I'm going to have you do it head nod. I know it might sound a little bit strange or look a little bit strange, but it works. Don't do this exercise if you're pregnant. If you are prone to panic disorder or anxiety, you have to go easy. If you've got any serious medical conditions, don't do stressor exercises. I'm going to go easy enough with you anyway, but at the same time, if pregnant, don't do it. But if you are prone to panic disorder or anxiety, you have to go easy, because this will involve generating air hunger, and you don't know, or I don't know, how your body is going to react to air hunger. And some people have a stronger reaction than others. And if I give you an air hunger that's too strong, that can have a strong psychological reaction, and it could tip you into a fight or flight response. Yeah. Now, in saying that, it's actually pretty okay. So whenever you're ready, take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your breath for about 10 head nods. And then to let go and to breathe in through your nose. And now you're just breathing normal for about a half a minute or so. Now, if 10 head nods feels comfortable for you, what I would like you to do in the next one is to do it for about 15 head nods. So the objective here is, when you hold your breath for a long time at the end of expiration, the gas carbon dioxide increases in your lungs, increases in your blood, and that in turn then will help to decongest your nose. If you have a stuffy nose, you never just have a stuffy nose. You're also more likely to be tired. And people with nasal congestion or nasal obstruction also have reduced cognitive function, concentration. So if you think of executive function as human beings, our ability to plan and organize and reason and make decisions, so our decision-making capabilities is going to be influenced by whether we are innate nasal breathers or if we have a stuffy nose causing mouth breathing. And it's not just that mouth breathing is causing a problem during sleep. It goes beyond that, but researchers don't know why. So a stuffy nose is never just a stuffy nose. And again, take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose, and just gently nod your head up and down, holding your breath and keep relaxing into the body. And we've got 2 J Murrays, which is very interesting. And keep going, keep holding your breath, keep relaxing into the body, and try and do about 15 head nods or so, and then let go, but make sure you breathe in and out through your nose. Now, the other aspect there is that as you do a long breath hold, there's a gas called nitric oxide that's continuously being produced in the paranasal sinuses and also locally in your nose. And as you hold your breath, nitric oxide accumulates in the nasal cavity. And then when you let go, you're breathing in. So you're carrying that nitric oxide into your lungs. And nitric oxide helps to open up your airways. It helps to redistribute blood throughout the lungs. And it also helps to sterilize the air. So nitric oxide is the gas that protects your lungs, but you don't harness nasal nitric oxide if you're breathing through an open mouth. There is nothing in your mouth that serves any purpose for respiration, either on the breath in or on the breath out. And if you think about it, what is in your mouth? Your teeth, your gums, your hard palate, your soft palate, saliva, your tongue, the back of the throat. And none of those do any function for your breathing. And if mouth breathing was where it was at, nature would have evolved, or at least the human body would have evolved, that there would be something in the mouth that serves some purpose for respiration. The answer is zero. The human mouth has no function. Everything inside the mouth is for eating, for speaking, for drinking, and if you're lucky, for kissing. And that's about it. So can we do this exercise again? Take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose, and just gently nod your head up and down, and keep going and keep relaxing into the body, and keep going until you build up a moderate to strong air hunger, but without overdoing it. And again, if you're pregnant, don't do it. If you have serious medical conditions, don't do it. If you have panic disorder or anxiety, you have to go easy. So then you let go, you breathe in through your nose, and then you're breathing normally. Now, some of you, I'd be interested if you put it into chat. Are you noticing that is your nose getting more stuffy, less stuffy, or the same? Okay. So normally you have to do that 5 or 6 times before you do it. So I'm going to wait one more time and then we will do it again. So the amazing thing about the human nose is that it does serve many, many functions. I currently have a list of about 31 functions that the nose does. And even if you're continuously breathing through the nose, you have better recruitment of the diaphragm. You have a connection with the nose and the brain that you don't have via the mouth. If you're breathing with better recruitment of the diaphragm, you have better stabilization of the spine. You're more likely to have functional movement. You're less likely to be injured. And if you do physical exercise with your mouth closed, you have increased blood flow and oxygen delivery to the heart and brain, which can have a protective effect, and especially on the heart. So there's a recent paper that was written by George Dallam, and he looked at fibrosing, which is scarring of the heart muscle in endurance athletes. And he put this down to the miles, the hours that the athletes were doing, and likely hyperventilating, breathing through an open mouth, blowing off too much carbon dioxide during physical exercise, reducing blood flow to the heart. So people are doing physical exercise. Yes, there's greater demands on the heart. And of course, the role of the heart is to pump blood throughout the body, but the heart needs its own blood supply. How can you influence blood flow to the heart? There is a gas called carbon dioxide that will have some role to play there. But also, how can you influence blood flow to your brain? So if you do physical exercise with your mouth closed, you will also improve blood flow to your brain, typically by between 5 and 10%. And if you think of the individuals who are doing physical exercise to help with their mental health, and if you can improve blood flow to the brain, you're going to have to reduce brain cell excitability. And by reducing brain cell excitability, it helps to reduce rumination of the mind. So there's another aspect there in terms of sleep. If you have poor sleep quality, waking up with a dry mouth in the morning, you're also more likely to have rumination of the mind. Now, rumination of the mind is when we are doing one thing, but we are thinking of something else, that we spend a lot of time in unproductive thinking. And that's one of the major pillars of Oxygen Advantage. I find the human mind tools that we can bring into our daily life. And I would say from personal experience, I spent 13 years in formal education. I didn't know how to concentrate when I came out of it. Education did not teach me how to think. Sorry, education taught me how to think. It did not teach me how to stop thinking. I was overthinking. Nor did it teach me how to be able to drive or place my attention on where I wanted to place it upon. It didn't give me the ability to have some degree of control over thought processes. And that is probably the most important function in human beings because it does influence our quality of work, our state of mind, but overall our happiness. Now, the last 25 years, 26 years, so half my life is spent stuck in my head, and the other half of my life I spent using breathing techniques to optimize blood flow to the brain, to improve my sleep quality, to balance the autonomic nervous system, and to pay attention to the breath. But it wasn't just about paying attention to the breath. That was the point that I made earlier on. I think mindfulness is wonderful, but what if you're in a state of chronic hyperventilation? What if you have poor quality sleep, waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning in a state of hyperarousal? You're still going to have rumination of the mind. And if you are a teacher of mindfulness, it would be so much easier for your students if you also looked at their sleep quality, because you could be teaching them mindfulness, but you could get so much more out of it if, for example, their sleep quality improved and you improve blood flow to the brain. So let's go back to the slides, and then I'm going to come back to it in a few minutes. So we looked at this slide here, it's the different types of training. And I also have a training in Colorado. So we had one lady from Colorado here earlier on. I've got one training in Denver, and that's on the 27th to the 29th of June. Now, this is in person. So the price is $1,350. There is $200 off. If you use this code HOS200, that's up until Sunday the 12th. So this is a face-to-face training. So it includes everything in terms of the advanced, but the only difference is it's face-to-face. Now, there's also a special offer for people who make a booking in the 24 hours that you get a free starter pack, and that's on top of it. So again, that's when you use the code FITNESS20, valid for 7 days only, but that's within the 24 hours. Okay, just to give you a glimpse into the training portal, this is the functional breathing training portal. It's very modern. I pretty much revised all materials. 23 years of experience went into it. We finished this portal. We launched it towards the end of last year. So there's a number of different modules. It's actually quite simple. There's a slideshow. There's a video explaining the slideshow. Then I'm talking you through the slideshow. And then there's a quiz. And when you complete the quizzes, a certain amount of quizzes, then you receive a certificate in terms of functional breathing. So this would be the functional breathing instructor training portal. Breathing is more than just the biomechanics. You know, sometimes there's a lot of emphasis on the diaphragm, you know, and of course the diaphragm is the main breathing muscle. And during inspiration, a signal is sent from the brain to the diaphragm. And the diaphragm breathing muscle is just located at the base of the ribs, and it separates our thorax from the abdomen. So when a signal is sent from the brain to the diaphragm moves downwards, and as the diaphragm moves downwards and the intercostal muscles pull out, this enlarges the volume of the thorax, which in turn reduces the pressure inside the chest to cause air to be drawn into the lungs. It's not the air coming into the lungs that pushes the diaphragm downwards. It's the diaphragm which is moving downwards, which in turn is generating almost like a suction pressure that's sucking the air into the lungs. And during expiration, your diaphragm is moving back to its resting position, and it's almost that this is squeezing the air out of the lungs, but it's doing it quite gently by an elastic recoil. So every breath that we take throughout the day, we have recruitment of the diaphragm. And it's important that we have a good recruitment of the diaphragm, because if we think of the human lungs, the majority of blood flow is in the lower lobes and not in the upper. And there is a connection between the diaphragm and the mind, and the diaphragm is also providing stabilization of the spine. 50% of people with lower back pain have dysfunctional breathing. Is it the lower back pain which is causing dysfunctional breathing, or is it dysfunctional breathing which in turn is causing lower back pain? It could be both. So very often there's a bidirectional feedback here. The biochemical is very important. This is all about carbon dioxide. This is the one that gets often overlooked. This is the driver of your breathing. If you have a strong reaction or a strong sensitivity to the accumulation of the gas carbon dioxide, your breathing is going to be fast. Your breathing could be that bit harder, and you're more likely to hyperventilate. And in that instance, you're more likely to have your autonomic nervous system in an increased stress response. You're more likely to feel that you're not getting enough air. If you feel that you're not getting enough air, it can drive an irregular breathing pattern. So you tend to sigh more. And because you're feeling you're not getting enough air, very often the individual then breathes in their upper chest to compensate. And because of poor breathing from a biochemical point of view, it can impact the airways. And if the nose, for example, is stuffy, this in turn causes mouth breathing. And mouth breathing then will reinforce that because it will more likely cause upper chest breathing, faster and harder breathing. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to look down at your chest. So look down at your chest and take the breath through your mouth. So when you breathe through your mouth, what part of the body is being engaged? And also look at the quality of that breath. You know, if you think of the mouth to the nose, you've got two small nostrils and your mouth is a bigger space. So when you're switching from mouth to nose breathing, there's an increased resistance placed on your breathing. So your nose imposes a resistance to your breathing. That's about 2.5 times that of the mouth. But your nose, by slowing down breathing, is helping to bring balance to the autonomic nervous system. And it was also discovered back in 1988 that when you continuously breathe it through your nose, that the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood increased by 10%. Never just think of respiration of what's coming into your nose or mouth. Always think about what's happening downstream. Can you, by changing your breathing patterns, influence alveolar ventilation? So can you influence the volume of air that reaches the small air sacs in the lungs? Because ultimately, that's where gas exchange takes place. Can you also influence oxygen transfer from your lungs into your blood? And the answer is yes. And more importantly, can you influence oxygen delivery from the blood to the tissues and organs? And the answer is yes. So we never think about breathing, just what's coming into the body here. Always think about the next step. And there's 4 steps at which we can influence respiration, right down to oxygen delivery to the tissues and organs. Now, in a very simple way, breathe through your nose during physical exercise. By breathing through your nose, you will add an extra load onto the diaphragm to help strengthen it. You're also more likely that it will function better for you. So you're exercising the diaphragm. By breathing through your nose during physical exercise, your body produces more carbon dioxide. And when you have your mouth closed, the carbon dioxide is not able to leave the body so quickly, so it accumulates in your lungs just a little, and it accumulates in the blood leaving the lungs, which in turn helps to increase your blood flow. And also as carbon dioxide increases in the blood pH drops, and red blood cells release oxygen more readily to the tissues and organs. So if you do physical exercise with your mouth open versus physical exercise with your mouth closed, there's an entirely different scenario going on. Now, I'm not talking about sprinting with your mouth closed, but I will say this. We have plenty of athletes who can sprint and go into zone 4 and zone 5 with their mouth closed. And the reason being is because they've adapted nasal breathing, but they've also practiced the oxygen advantage in terms of improving their tolerance to CO2. And carbon dioxide is the driver, the primary driver to breathe. If you can improve your tolerance to carbon dioxide, your drive to breathe is less. And that means then when you do physical exercise, you won't have as much ventilation. So there's an economical saving there as well. You can train your body to do physical exercise with less ventilation. Now that's beneficial because you have to think that every breath that you take, your breathing muscles need oxygen. And if you can learn to do physical exercise with less ventilation, you're not working your breathing muscles so hard. You're not going to be consuming so much oxygen to support your breathing muscles, but also when you improve your breathing patterns, you're going to be more efficient with your breathing. Now, you might think that what I'm saying is a big sale or anything like that. It's not. I've written 11 books on this subject, and genuinely, this is the power of breathing, and this often gets overlooked. You know, people think breathing is just this breathing exercise, or hyperventilate for a period of time. Yes, it has a purpose, but this is where, when I was talking about the very, very thing at the start, when we think about breathing, we have to think of all of the ins and outs of breathing, the different dimensions of breathing, the different applications of breathing, and who are we working with? Because I think then, breathing is more likely to go mainstream, which it should be. Every child, every teenager should know about this, and every adult, of course. So the advanced techniques, we do breath holds, long breath holds, and we drop blood oxygen saturation down to about 85%. This is quite a stressor. This would go way beyond a sprint in terms of stimulating anaerobic glycolysis. And the reason that we lower the blood oxygen saturation and increase carbon dioxide is to force the body to make adaptations. And those adaptations, there's a number of adaptations that take place, but likely probably the more pronounced one is the increased buffering capacity inside in the muscle compartment. So that's to delay lactic acid and fatigue. But of course, when you do a breath hold on land, and we do it during physical exercise, and we don't hyperventilate before the breath hold, because if you hyperventilate and then you do a breath hold, you've depleted your alarm to breathe. Yes, you will hold your breath for a lot longer, but there's a risk that your blood oxygen saturation goes too low and then you pass out. So I don't want my students lowering their blood oxygen saturation below 60%. I don't want to be reducing the blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain, and precisely because I don't know the effects of it, but nobody knows the effects of it. So if we're doing long breath holds following hyperventilation, that's an entirely different scenario than doing a breath hold as part of a dynamic apnea. And a dynamic apnea is when you're normal breathing, you're doing physical exercise, but you're adding a breath hold to it to add an extra load onto what you're doing. So I'm going to do some light breathing in a moment, and I think we will come back to the breath holds. If you remember your BOLT score from earlier on, so that was the length of your comfortable breath hold time. And it gives you an indicator of your tolerance to carbon dioxide. So your length of breath hold time is an indirect indicator of your ability to tolerate CO2. If you have a longer breath hold time, you've got an improved tolerance or a good tolerance of carbon dioxide. If you've got a short breath hold time, it indicates that you've got quite a strong sensitivity to the accumulation of carbon dioxide. So if you see it here, if your breath hold time is 11 seconds, it's going to be difficult for you to do physical exercise because you're going to feel overly breathless. You're also going to feel air hunger. So it's ironic that the person who breathes the most air is more likely to be frequently sighing, telling you that I can't take a deep breath. That's not just a biomechanical issue. That could be a biochemical issue. Their breathing is very often more likely to be in the upper chest because of the drive to breathe. Very often a mixture of mouth and nose breathing, again, to try and compensate for that increased drive to breathe. But see, the thing about breathing is that it's trainable. Now, you might say, well, people don't have a breath hold time of 11 seconds, but they do. The people who would be most vulnerable to this would be people with perfectionist tendencies because they set such high demands on themselves. Females breathe differently to men. So say, for example, during the different phases of the monthly cycle, so you have menstruation, then you have the follicular phase, you have proliferation, ovulation, and luteal phase. And post-ovulation, mid-luteal phase, there's an increase in progesterone and estrogen. Progesterone is a respiratory stimulant. So the female is more likely to have faster and harder breathing pre-menstruation. And that faster and harder breathing post-ovulation, mid-luteal phase, is going to cause a drop of carbon dioxide by as much as 25%. And the drop of carbon dioxide then can contribute to symptoms such as fatigue, such as increased pain, such as headaches, such as anxiety, such as panic disorder. And females are 2 to 3 times more likely to have panic disorder than men. So do bear in mind that yes, female breathing is different to male breathing, not just in terms of the hormonal influence on breathing, but also the airways. Females have to work harder to breathe because they have a smaller airway. So if you think if you're a personal trainer and you're working with a female, you have to bear in mind that her breathing from a biomechanical point of view is going to be different than when you're working with a man. And researchers only found that out, I don't know, maybe about 5 years ago. So it's relatively new, but you'll see it, if you do some research on it. You'll see that. Now, the hormonal influence on breathing is known since 1915, but unfortunately, it never really get out there. But it's still there, of course. But yeah, so coming back to this, if your bolt score is above 25 seconds, it indicates that your breathing is functional. So this is the goal. Now, when we're working with athletes, we want athletes to get to 40 seconds. So 25 seconds is a really good place to be. It's a lot better than 11 seconds, put it that way. But you might have a student, and your student is overly breathless, increased anxiety, autonomic nervous system, and an increased stress response, hyperarousal, experiencing insomnia, and all of the things that go with that. Because, breathing is that function that you can influence, but breathing is very much tied in with your stress response. So you see then breathing when the bolt score is higher, 25 seconds, breathing is normal, respiratory rate is normal, breathing is regular, your breathing is comfortable, your breathing is effortless. You can do physical exercise, you're not going to be disproportionately breathless. You can easily breathe in and out through your nose. Now, of course, when you switch from mouth to nose breathing, there is an increased air hunger during physical exercise, but the more you do your physical exercise with your mouth closed, your body adapts to it. But that will depend on your bolt score, your nasal size, your fitness levels, and your degree of adaptation. But as I said earlier on, we have athletes who run marathons with their mouth closed. We have athletes doing zones 4, zone 5 with their mouth closed. And we also see a difference in heart rate variability. So the athletes send us information. We see that nasal breathing during physical exercise, when the individual has adapted to it, even in long endurance runs, is less stressful than mouth breathing. So always think about your bolt score as an indicator of your breathing, but also your ability to do physical exercise. We don't want to overdo it. If you have a low bolt score, you do easier breathing exercises, but you do easier physical exercise. Now, you could have a bolt score of 15 seconds and you could be a sprinter, but at what cost? So yes, you could be performing. The bolt score isn't necessarily an indicator of performance. Your bolt score is an indicator of your functional breathing patterns. Your bolt score is an indicator of your autonomic nervous system. So that's where the feedback is there. We recently launched a 5K challenge. 2,000 people participated in it. Here's just a couple of people here. So Berlin half marathon finisher, running with mouth closed, and you can see the quotations there. So, in terms of the world of nasal breathing during physical exercise, it was a key foundation of oxygen advantage right from the outset. Your nose is where it's at. Yes, there is an adaptation phase, but it's worth sticking with it. And this kind of gives you an overview. This diagram is taken out of the book, The Oxygen Advantage, that I wrote back in 2013, 2014. The information is still relevant. Of course, I have more experience 10 years later, more information, but the basic information from the book is still very relevant as well. But that was taken from the book. And that's where I say breathing, that's what you can do with it. There's a lot of applications there. So our training gives the tools to excel your clients. So, if you have clients coming in, are you able to assess their breathing? And more importantly, how do you know if they're making progress from a breathing perspective? So say, for example, you're a yoga instructor, you're a Pilates, or you're a physiotherapist, and you're working with your students' breathing. But how can you gauge if they are actually making progress from a breathing perspective? So to do that, of course, you need to have assessment tools, and you need to look at their breathing from a number of different dimensions. And there are validated assessment tools, so you can compare then, what's the progress that your student is making. You can, of course, with our training, is give your clients the tools, the why, the science behind it. It's very, very important to be able to tailor and adapt the exercises based on your client's needs, to motivate and to evolve. So as the client is progressing, you're able to add an extra load. And that's the basic understanding of breathing. So I'm just going to come back to this. I have a couple of exercises to do. So, as I said, we would love to have you on board if you are considering breathing. Our prices are very, very affordable. You might say I'm not going to say are they too cheap. I know they're an amount of money, but we've purposely always had, in terms of the price, to make it affordable for people. So level 1, you see it there, the functional breathing. is $396 or Australian 559, but that's when you use the fitness code. Promo code, which is fitness20. And then you have breathing for yoga, for example. That's instructor training. It's a new training course, and that will be based on a book, Breathing for Yoga. So I did some of the videos, and we had two yoga instructors also do the videos to bring the whole thing together. And you can see the price of that. So that's level 1. So there's 2 different courses in level 1. And then level 1 and level 2 is the advanced. So this is when you have the 7 by 2 hour sessions with me. So you also have more presentation, simulation of altitude training, information. So for example, bringing it into the corporate world, working with first responders, we work with police, we work with different organizations, we work with groups such as musicians and people who actually bring breathing into their way of life for performance improvements. And if you are located in the United States, in terms of face-to-face, we do have a face-to-face coming up, 27th to 29th, a couple of months' time. And you can see it there. There is a discount code, HOS200, and that's for $200 off. That's up until the 12th of April. So that's at the Vivas Institute, just outside the airport. It's actually very accessible. It's only about 5 minutes drive from Denver Airport. And there is a special offer. Those people who buy within the 24 hours, you get the free starter pack. So that's something on top of the discounts that are already in the previous courses. I'd like to do, before we go into questions, I'd like to do the breathe light exercise with you. If you activate a stress response, and I'm sure over, just many's a time that you have gone into a stress response and you know how your body reacts to it. Your heart rate accelerates, you're feeling tense, your mouth goes dry. So how about doing the opposite and activating the relaxation response? And will your body give you feedback pretty quickly? Now, the breathe light exercise is quite an interesting exercise because on one hand, you have air hunger, which is a slight psychological stress. But on the other hand, that increased carbon dioxide is stimulating the vagus nerve, improving blood flow to the brain, which is a physiological relaxation. So the question for you is going to be, which side outweighs the other? Does the psychological stress of air hunger outweigh the physiological relaxation, or does the physiological relaxation outweigh the psychological stress? We're all a bit different when it comes to breathing. We do have a different relationship with our breathing. And say, for example, when we've had trauma in our life, we can have an increased sensitivity to carbon dioxide, but we can also have an increased fear response to air hunger. Air hunger is a primal fear. We have fear for lack of food, fear for lack of water, but probably the biggest one is a fear of lack of air. I'd like you to give this a go, and it is going to induce a sensation of air hunger, but it's okay because you experience air hunger whenever you do physical exercise. If you go for a fast walk or a jog or you're down in the gym, you're going to feel air hunger. So what I'm going to have you do is, instead of moving your body to generate air hunger, we're going to breathe a little bit less. And this is just to tease out carbon dioxide, because people always talk that oxygen is good and carbon dioxide is bad. Truth be told, we only breathe out 15% of our carbon dioxide. Only breathe out 15%. The human body retains 85%. Carbon dioxide is the gateway for oxygen delivery to the tissues and organs. So whoever come up with it that oxygen is good and breathe in full breaths and bring more oxygen into your lungs and get rid of the poisonous waste gas carbon dioxide, it's a flawed argument. It doesn't stand up if you were to look at any textbook and it with a section on physiology. So, but instead of me talking about it, why not give it a go, yeah? So what I would like you to do is put one hand on your chest and one hand just above your navel. So you're putting one hand on your chest, one hand just above your navel, and just tune in on your breathing patterns. So you're just tuning in on your breathing patterns. Bring your attention out of your mind and onto your breath. So you may be focusing on feeling the slightly colder air coming in and out into your nose and the slightly warmer air as it leaves your nose. We'll keep this very simple. All I would like you to do is soften and slow down the speed of your breathing. So as you're breathing in, can you slow down the speed of the airflow coming into your nose? So can you really soften and slow down the speed of the air coming into your nose, almost as if your breath in is imperceptible? So as you're taking that air into your lungs and that air is coming into your nose, can you really slow down the speed of the air coming into your nose, almost as if there's hardly any turbulence, that the airflow is so smooth that you can hardly feel your breathing? Now, after you've taken that breath in, bring a total feeling of relaxation to the body and allow a slow and relaxed and a gentle breath out. So the breath out should be really slow, relaxed, and gentle, but the breath in should be very, very soft and slow. So you're taking a soft and slow, gentle breath in. You're so conscious of the airflow coming into your nose, and you're slowing down the speed of that airflow, that your airflow is so smooth, almost that you're feeling hardly any air coming into your nose. So you're taking a really soft and slow, gentle breath in, and a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle breath out. And the objective is that you feel that you're not getting enough air. And the sensation that you're not getting enough air is not your oxygen is dropping. It's on the contrary, it's your carbon dioxide is slightly accumulating. So here's the ironic thing with this exercise. You're breathing a little bit less air, but that doesn't mean that there's less oxygen being delivered throughout the body. There's more. Because as you breathe a little bit less air, carbon dioxide has increased slightly in your lungs because you're not breathing as much air. So as a result, you're holding on to more of the gas carbon dioxide that your body is producing. As carbon dioxide increases in your lungs, it will increase in the blood leaving the lungs. And as carbon dioxide increases in the blood leaving the lungs, it helps to dilate your blood vessels. So your 50,000 miles of blood vessels are opening up. But it's not just that it helps to improve blood flow. It's also going to help improve oxygen delivery. So what I would like you to do as you do this exercise is pay attention to the internal temperature of your body. Pay attention to the internal temperature of your hands. Pay attention to the saliva in the mouth. Has the psychological stress outweighed the physiological relaxation? Or has the physiological relaxation outweighed the psychological stress? Pay attention to your state of mind. Pay attention to your heart rate. Pay attention to how your breathing is responding. Now, of course, whenever your mind wanders, bring your attention back onto your breath. It is normal that your mind will wander. But whenever you bring your attention back onto the breath, now you're helping to develop and strengthen your attention muscle, your ability to hold your attention on one thing. So that's why, it can be very, very important. You might also find that it's easier to anchor your attention onto the breath when there's a sensation of air hunger, because you have to bear this in mind. When you're breathing a little bit less air, you're likely to increase blood flow to the brain by between 5 and 10%. So I'd like you to continue with this exercise for about 30 seconds more, taking a really soft and a slow, gentle breath of air coming into your nose, and a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle breath out. And all you're doing is softening and slowing down the speed of your breathing to the point that you feel air hunger. Now, if the air hunger is a little bit too much for you and you have involuntary contractions of the diaphragm, take a rest. So it's not about having too much of air hunger. It's not about having too little. It's just about getting it right. So not too much, not too little, just right. So you're looking for the sweet spot. Okay, take a rest there. So when you're starting off, it can be a little bit tricky. So don't worry about how you did it. This is still an exercise that you could be practicing yourself. Just curious, a show of hands. How many of you felt air hunger when you were doing it? Did any of you feel air hunger? Yeah, great. Did you notice any change in the saliva in your mouth? In other words, is your mouth drier? Is it the same, or is there increased watery saliva? And the other thing is your state of mind. Are you sleepier? Are you more kind of tense? So I'm kind of curious in terms of the chat, because it can be interesting as a group of people. Like we only spent about 3 minutes on that exercise. Was the 3 minutes sufficient to induce any sort of response? And if it did, what sort of response? So if you think of the words rest and digest, if you activate the rest response, how do you feel? You feel sleepy, yeah? If you activate the digest response, how do you feel? You will have increased watery saliva in the mouth. If you activate the fight or flight response, you will have a faster heart rate. You feel tense, your mouth can go dry. So it depends on the person. You know, we would never get it 100% just within 3 minutes. And all I kind of wanted to do was just give you a little bit of an insight into it. Whenever you breathe that way, you're helping to induce relaxation. But it takes practice just to get the sweet point. And don't worry about how you're doing it. There's times that the air hunger is a bit too strong. There's times that the air hunger is a little bit too light. Doesn't matter. You just keep working with it. That's my go-to exercise. So I teach about 26 different breathing techniques. That is the one that I would say outweighs the rest of them. And the reason being is because there's so much going on. Your ability to improve your blood circulation and oxygen delivery alone with that exercise. Your ability to improve your CO2 tolerance, to stimulate the vagus nerve, to strengthen the baroreflex, to surrender to a feeling of air hunger. There's something in that as well, that you're training your brain almost not to react to discomfort, but you're giving a very controlled dose of air hunger. So that's probably why now, of course, people will say, well, what about the diaphragm? Of course, the diaphragm is very important. But with that exercise there, I wanted to ignore the diaphragm. I only wanted to focus on the breathing from a biochemical point of view and forget about everything else. And that's the way we often do it. We focus on one dimension, build that one up onto the next dimension, build that one up onto the next. It's a little bit like your personal trainer. Your personal trainer gives you one exercise to do. He or she is not asking you to do 2 or 3 things at the same time. Focus on one, build it up, go on to the next, build it up. Yeah. So let's open it up for questions. I know John has been answering your questions, but any questions you have, I'm more than happy to give an attempt to answer them. Any questions breathing related, you could put them into chat or unmute yourselves and let's get a conversation going. So if somebody has a smaller nasal passage due to a bent nose, is it realistic? Yeah, I suppose, Felicity, we never want to force nasal breathing. And it's always about breathing comfortably through the nose. Now, many people have a deviated septum. It's probably about 50 to 60%. If you see my nose, it's far from straight, put it that way. The question is, do you feel comfortable breathing through your nose? And it's always a good aspect is try the nose unblocking exercise that we did at the very, very beginning. So this is the head nodding. And if that wasn't effective enough for you, then do some breath holds while walking, which is a bit stronger, and see if that helps to open up your nose. And that will indicate the degree of reversible obstruction. And then the question to ask yourself is that enough for you to breathe through your nose? So I always want to work to see, can that person breathe comfortably through their nose? I practice the nose unblocking exercise because I'm not sure what's causing the nasal obstruction. Is it reversible or is it irreversible? I have them do that exercise. If the nose gets better, it's telling me at least some of the obstruction is reversible. We can work with that. So during physical exercise, because I have a deviated septum, I wear a nasal dilator. We have our own ones, and a nasal dilator flares open the nostrils. So if you put one finger here and one finger here, just gently prise your nostrils, and that helps to flare open your nostrils, and that makes your breathing easier. So yeah. Does anybody else any questions? I'm just going to go through it here. What about menopausal women and post? We have a lot of information. Actually, quite a few of our instructors work specifically with women. Dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system is often a factor. Sleep disorder breathing really kicks in post-menopause. Sleep apnea increases by about 200%. I have written a scientific paper on the application of functional breathing for the phenotypes of sleep apnea. Breathing plays a role, and breathing can be, the thing about breathing is that if you're looking at improving functional breathing patterns, it's a very direct way of influencing the autonomic nervous system, but also your sleep. Never wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. So a few years ago, I brought out a product called MyoTape, And it's since sold about 16 million strips. So that would be 16 million individual night strips that people have worn. And it's a tape that surrounds the mouth, bring the lips together. 50% of you here wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. If you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, you're not waking up feeling refreshed. But don't start just forcing nasal breathing during sleep. Start during the day. When you're going for a walk, keep your mouth closed. When you're sitting down, you've got some time to yourself. Instead of scrolling on your mobile phone, bring your attention inwards. Focus on softening your breathing. There's a lot you can do with it. Yeah. But yeah, post-menopause, breathing can have a role. You will find YouTube videos as well from Oxygen Advantage, I'm sure. There's YouTube videos. I know I had a conversation with Dr. Louise Oliver as well in buteycoclinic.com. So that's a channel on YouTube too. And she's a GP in England, a Buteyko instructor, and spoke about that topic. Sorry, John, you've answered a lot of that. So I'm just going through your questions. It might be easier if some of you unmute yourself because I have a lot of comments to get through to try and get to the questions.
Can you describe what you mean exactly by breathing by breath hunger? What is the hunger?
Yeah.
How do you?
Air hunger. So during the breathe light exercise, the objective is that you should feel that you're not getting quite enough air. So you should feel that you would like to take in a deeper breath. So it's a sensation of breathlessness, but it's controlled. You know, we don't want the air hunger to be too much that it causes involuntary contractions of the diaphragm. So because if, for example, the air hunger gets a little bit too much, which indicates the carbon dioxide is increased, of course, if it's too much, the brain reacts and the brain then starts sending increased impulses to breathe, but it's hard to sustain it. So I suppose, Elizabeth, air hunger is the sensation that you're not getting enough air. Does that make sense?
It just seems like you could have a little bit or a lot. I was not sure if I was feeling air hunger or not. That's
okay. So the point is, it's to have a tolerable sensation of air hunger that you absolutely know it's there, but not too much that you have involuntary contractions of the diaphragm. Okay. If you're not sure if you had it or not, it's likely you didn't have it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so what I would say is when you're practicing the exercise, keep gently slowing it down, slowing it down, slowing down your breathing, softening your breathing. So it's not just about the respiratory rate. You know, you could slow down your breathing to 6 breaths per minute. It may not cause air hunger because slowing down the rate to 6 breaths, what's happening tidal volume? The size of each breath could increase disproportionately. In actual fact, you could slow down your respiratory rate to 6 breaths per minute, and the tidal volume could increase disproportionately that the individual ends up over breathing. So that's why we never focus on just the respiratory rate. It's a big, big mistake. We see it in the breathing world, you know, because it's easy. You know, it's easy to give somebody a breathing exercise, breathe in for 4 seconds, out for 6. It doesn't take a whole lot of training to do it, but it can backfire. Yeah, because people can be doing slow breathing but feeling lightheaded afterwards. So yes, they've slowed down the respiratory rate, but they have ended up increasing their minute volume. They're over breathing. Does anybody else? It's just a bit easier for me, to be honest with you, and quicker if you unmute yourselves. I am scrolling through the question. There's a lot of comments. Hello?
Can I ask a bit of a selfish question?
Yeah, of course. Go for it.
I'm training for a 2K on the rowing machine in October. And
yes.
I've figured it out. If I get everything right, if I can get my weight right and all the rest of it, I could possibly aim at a record for my age group.
A few.
And I just know I need to find every little possible tweak. And this feels like it could be the most important one and the least used by anyone else.
Yes.
And I've done level 1 with Dean in Bondi.
Yeah.
And so I'm really keen on the method and I haven't been implementing it enough. And I'm just thinking, progressing from my Bolt score of 24, 25,
Yeah.
how to get to that target of 40. And John responded that I could follow that 5K program for
Yes.
runners. Would that apply for me?
All
Even
of
on
it. All of it. And what I would say is don't necessarily focus on the Bolt score. Focus on improving your technique and do some of your training with nasal breathe only.
yes, I
So
have been.
you have been. Now it can be helpful to use a nasal dilator. So the whole objective would be is do your training with restricted breathing. So breathing in and out through the nose is restricted breathing, and that's going to cause the body to make adaptations. And also change the cadence of your breath. You're better off taking slightly fuller breaths but less of them because it will improve alveolar ventilation. You're also going to have a better recruitment of the diaphragm. So your nasal breathing, but I don't know in a rowing machine, are you going to match the cadence of your breath with the number of reps? I'm not sure because I don't know
And
that sport.
yeah, as the rate goes up, which it will need to do for the race, you probably would be breathing 2 breaths per stroke. But in training, as the rate is lower and you're working less
Yes.
hard, you breathe in on the way forward and breathe out on the way back as you're
Yeah.
pulling.
Well, always remember a fuller breath but less of them is always more efficient than fast and shallow breathing because there's less air lost to dead space and there's a better alveolar ventilation. And if you're able to do it with nasal breathing, that's your workload. So you have to think of strengthening the diaphragm. You don't want diaphragm fatigue because if the respiratory muscle, if the diaphragm fatigues, what happens is it takes blood from the legs and then the legs go up from, well, you're going to lose the power in your legs. So it's very important. Now, the other thing I would say is I would do everything. Mouth closed during sleep is really important. Recovery post physical exercise is really, really important. Bringing your attention as well, strengthening your ability to hold attention. And people often talk about being able to hold attention on one thing, and they want to be able to hold attention during an event so there's less mind wandering, but they never consider what are they doing in the weeks and months up to the event. They could be practicing distraction all day long, and the mobile phone is the biggest distraction. I have no apps on my phone. I have no social media apps, nothing. And the reason being is because I know too well, and you know too, and everybody knows what those social media apps do. They consume our attention. It's almost that they're training the brain, that it's a superficial ability to hold attention and there's nothing deep about it. It's almost that we're just skimming the surface when we're on an app, but that's not good training for this. So the breath can be a really, really good way to do it, bringing attention into the body. So when you're doing your training, can you train with every cell of the body? So you're not just training your arms, you're not just training your legs, you have your attention dispersed throughout the body. After the training, mouth closed, tongue resting on the roof of the mouth, and also bringing your attention out of the head and into the body. And this way then, you've got mind, you have body, but you have sport as well. So I think oftentimes, people do physical exercise, they just go through the motions. They're doing physical exercise, but their attention is off elsewhere. There's a missed opportunity there. Like physical exercise, yes, training for the body is one, but what about training for the breath? That's important. But what about training for the brain? So whenever you do physical exercise, can you do it with all of your attention? And if you do your training with all of your attention, then you have all of your attention going into competition. And the other thing is then a preparation pre-competition. People talk about a warm-up pre-competition, warm-up for the muscles, but warm-up is all about preparation. Preparation for the mind, preparation for the nervous system, preparation for improving blood flow, opening up the airways, increased oxygen delivery. So the warm-up needs to go beyond what it is as well. So Marianne, it's not that I'm trying to complicate it, but if you look at that, what John sent you, that 2K, that 5K, it's a 2-hour video, is it? Yeah, I think it's a 2-hour. John is here beside me. I think it's 1.5 or 2 hours, but you'll have a lot of pointers throughout that.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Can I quickly add something to the rowing question?
Yes, of course.
It is actually really interesting because usually we try to sustain or support by body movement the breathing movement, so get them in harmony. So when you open the torso, it's an inhalation. When you close it, it's a passive exhalation. Now look at rowing. What Marianne just said: you inhale when you completely crunch, and you exhale when you open up and pull. I just noticed like rowing might be an exception to that rule when you breathe in, when you breathe out.
Yeah, like intuitively, though, I would say what you said at the start was correct. So during the expansion, you're taking the inhalation, and during the contraction, it's an exhalation. I think, I'm not sure. What did you say, Marianne?
The recovery phase on the way forward is relaxed. So you can still keep your chest wide, even though you're compressing your body. And yes, you're right.
Yes.
You do compress at the front end, and so if you're a little bit overweight and your chest is hitting your thighs, you will have some more resistance there. But yeah, it feels natural when you're doing it.
Right.
I would
And that's what it's all
say,
about.
I mean, when you're thinking about that too, if you're anytime that you lift up and back, you're actually compressing all the small muscles in your rib cage, so it might not allow your lungs to expand as much as possible. So that might be something to think about too. If you are inhaling as you're pulling, that might limit your lung expansion compared to that exhale as you're pulling, inhaling as you're releasing. So that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. There's like that sensation of drawing everything together, funneling your ribs down towards your hips, bracing as you are holding your back against the legs at the finish. So yeah, that would be awful if you were trying to inhale there. That would feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to pull up a paper. This was an interesting one. It was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, and they looked at 1,933 athletes in Japan. Now, they only assessed their breathing from a biomechanical point of view. They did what's called a high-low test. And as far as I know from this paper, they only assessed it in the standing position. But here's a group of athletes, and it was from 2017 to 2020. They found that 90% of them had dysfunctional breathing, that they were more breathing likely high in the upper chest and reduced recruitment of the diaphragm. And the problem with that is that's going to impact movement. That can increase the risk of injury. And even a technique during the sport itself. So this would come back to, yes, you can have a technique during your sport, but also look at how you're breathing in your everyday, because how you breathe in your everyday is going to be how you breathe during physical exercise. Say, for example, if we do have a breathing pattern that's off during the day, that breathing pattern doesn't suddenly correct itself when we do sports. Like, this is surprising. I'd have never suspected 90%. If somebody was to ask me what is the prevalence of dysfunctional breathing, yes, I would say in the anxiety population, about 75%. In the normal population, but see, it really depends on how you measure it. You know, they just looked at the biomechanical point of view. We would be looking at the biochemical, psychophysiological, and the biomechanical. But I would say typically it's about 30% of the general population. Even collegiate athletes, 84%. Professional and semi-professional athletes, 87.5%. High school athletes, 90%. So yeah, dysfunctional breathing can be prevalent in athletes, and we don't think about it.
More on that topic of athletes at the top level, for instance, who are definitely performing. How long is, you said they're marathoners who breathe through their nose the whole way? Or I'm thinking also of high intensity sports too, or a combination, high intensity and endurance. How difficult is that transition? I have a couple athletes in my world, and I'd love to expose them to this more. I mean, not that I know enough to tell them, but they work really hard at the work they do. I just wonder how, I guess the part you're saying of including other ways of, not just when you're working out or not just when you're training, but how does
the transition, if you were doing it 4 to 8 weeks, you'd be making some good progress. In a month can be quite significant. It all depends on, the bolt score earlier on.
Yeah.
It comes back to what we talked about at the very start. how do you assess your students' breathing? Because if you can assess your students' breathing from the start, then you know where they are at. Then you can prescribe breathing exercises according to that assessment. And then you can use that same assessment then, say, 4 weeks post.
Yeah.
And you can see is there a change. So you know the student is going in the right direction. Like the adaptation, the human body adapts pretty quickly. At the start, yes, of course, you're doing physical exercise. Most people do physical exercise with their mouth open. About 96% of individuals open mouth breathing during physical exercise. Now, of course, you could say, well, walking. No, it won't be as high during walking. But I'm talking about, say, zone 3. We would say that's probably 96%. But if an individual starts off with nasal breathing, yes, initially in the first couple of weeks, zone 1, zone 2, then into zone 3, then after about 6 weeks, for 5, 6 weeks into zone 4, but it will also depend on nasal airway size. So a nasal dilator can be necessary as well for some people. So both score, nasal airway size, adaptation period, fitness levels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's a good adaptation, and it's never that we want to do it, because some athletes might say, well, I'll never be able to go nasal breathing 100%. We're not looking for 100%. We're looking for nasal breathing to cause adaptations, because even those adaptations, when you breathe through your mouth during high intensity exercise, the adaptations that have happened during nasal breathing carry into mouth breathing. So you're still getting the benefit. How many times is there an emphasis on strengthening the breathing system? So athletes are working on their legs, they're working on their arms, they're working on their core, they're working on everything, but they're forgetting about respiration. But yet respiration is very important, because that's going to be fundamentally the ability to be able to, deliver oxygen to where it's needed. Yeah. And I think the mind is, of course, very important as well, but the two go hand in hand.
Well, a really interesting time to introduce it is when an athlete is injured and they can't do all the legs and the arms, and they can do the breathing.
Yeah, totally. And it's good for rehabilitation, because when the athlete is not able to do their full intensity, they can be applying breathing to add that extra load. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Do you cover that pretty significantly in these courses, in this certification program? I work with injury recovery and athletes.
Yeah, Nicholas, like all of it in terms of the functional breathing is applicable. So it would be very interesting even to start using the Bolt score with your athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about bringing in the functional everyday breathing. There's exercise that you can do during walking that they can be quite significant stressors. You can change the blood gases during walking by bringing in breath holds that would be similar to the effect of a sprint with the mouth open, even stronger. So say, for example, you have an athlete who is sprinting to stimulate anaerobic glycolysis. And if you had a pulse oximeter on that athlete, their blood oxygen saturation drops down to maybe about 93%. So that athlete is sprinting in the belief that they're running without air. If you get them walking with breath holds, such as somebody in rehabilitation, you can drop their blood oxygen saturation down to about 85% without the trauma. So in terms of stimulating anaerobic glycolysis, like that's one aspect of it. All of these exercises, instead of pushing the person to go harder and faster, restrict their air intake. So you're adding an extra load that way. Now, the breath holds is kind of an extreme example, but you can also bring in the functional breathing into their normal movement as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. In terms of weightlifting, I think there's an interesting connection there as well. You have to think of the diaphragm as providing stabilization of the spine. And there's Professor Kyle Kiesel. So earlier on, we looked at the Bolt score, and he put it to the test. He's a professor of physical therapy at Evansville University. So I'm just going to pull up his paper here. 1 second, just bear with me. Because ultimately, we have to think of the inner core, and we have to ask the question, is the core all about the abs? Or when you consider the inner core, should the diaphragm be taken into consideration? And it's often explained that the stabilization of the spine, it's almost that the core is a box. So you have the diaphragm as the roof, you have the pelvic floor as the base, you've got the abs to the front, and then you've got the spinal muscles to the back. And if the individual has dysfunctional breathing, it's going to impact then movement. This paper here will be a very interesting one for you to look upon. It's not necessarily the breathing during the weightlifting, but it's whether the system is able to cope with it. So dysfunctional breathing is linked to a number of health conditions such as lower back pain, neck pain, and it adversely affects the musculoskeletal system. Individuals with dysfunctional breathing often have decreased pain thresholds, impaired motor control, balance, and movement. There's no single test. So what he did was he looked at breath hold time, and he said that breath hold time is a simple screening tool to identify individuals with dysfunctional breathing. So earlier on, I said 25 seconds. That was his conclusion. His conclusion was that if your breath hold time, your BOLT score is greater than 25 seconds, there's an 89% chance that your breathing is functional. If you're interested in weightlifting, what I would do is tease out this here. So core muscle dysfunction, including atrophy and abnormal activation, has been linked with many common musculoskeletal problems, including lower back pain, ACL injury, neck pain, and overall increased injury risk. Subjects with dysfunctional breathing have been shown to demonstrate concurrent core dysfunction, including altered postural responses during limb movements and altered inner core muscle activation. Further, normal breathing has been described as forming the foundation of all movement patterns, while dysfunctional breathing has been shown to be related to clinical measures of dysfunctional movement, with subjects with dysfunctional breathing scoring lower on the FMS screen than norm. So, it's asking the question, how well is the individual breathing from a biomechanical point of view to be able to cope with the weight that the person is lifting? And yes, you could say, well, during the weightlifting, you're taking an inspiration. The diaphragm is moving downwards. That's providing stabilization. It's almost as if the abdomen then is like a pneumatic balloon. If I explain it this way, during inspiration, there's a negative pressure in the chest and there's a positive pressure in the abdomen. During expiration, there's a positive pressure in the chest and there's a negative pressure in the abdomen. So as a weightlifter is typically lifting a weight, they will breathe in and they will hold their breath for a brief period of time. And it's almost then that the abdomen is providing stabilization of the spine. So it's when the diaphragm is moving downwards. But then you have to ask the question, how freely is that diaphragm moving in the first place? And is that diaphragm moving freely enough to provide that stabilization? That's where functional breathing or dysfunctional breathing will come in. If you want to read about it, I have a book called The Breathing Cure, and there's a chapter in it. So I enlisted the help as well of physical therapists and individuals in the field because I only know the breathing side of it, but of course they know the biomechanical in terms of the muscle side of it better. So the two of us brought together. I'm not a fitness professional, but more exploring it for mental health. I'm a veteran, paramedic. Where's a good start? Okay, John, you got. Darren, great. Darren, it's always interesting in terms of veterans is PTSD and poor sleep and the connection there and dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system. And, there's various different methods of how do you help to bring balance? How do you dampen the stress response? And the thing about, say, somebody with PTSD or a trauma, they don't always have a good relationship with their breathing. They don't always feel comfortable bringing their attention to the breath because when you bring attention to your breathing, it can generate a fear response. Well, how about going for a walk with your mouth closed? How about going for a run with your mouth closed? You still get a breathing exercise in. You don't have to pay attention to your breathing. So there's many ways of skinning a cat. Yeah. I would say as well, keep an eye on sleep apnea. It's more common with people with PTSD. And the problem with sleep apnea is that it doesn't allow the body to recover because it's constantly putting that person into an increased stress response. And that increased stress response during sleep then carries into the day. An increased stress response during the day follows back into sleep. So then that person then may be more likely to wake up during sleep. They wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They have what's called low arousal threshold. They're wondering, why am I lying here awake? What has wakened me up? There could be many factors that cause to wake up. But again, it can point to a dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system. A lot of these things are vicious circles. One is feeding into the other. Because I've always wondered the question, how come with PTSD that sleep apnea can be as high as 80%? It just does not make sense, but yet there's a connection there. Yeah. And don't wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. Anybody wakes up with a dry mouth in the morning, it's not good. Going to dash now. I'll have to wrap it up a little bit in a couple of minutes, if that's okay. If you were to use some breath holds pre-training as what stage of the warm-up? Yeah, John, you got it. Thank you. Actually, I think we're coming to the end of it. Okay. I might wrap up if that's okay, because it's a late night here and we're jet lag. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, Irish time. I'd like to say thanks very much for here at the Masterclass. If you are considering to bring breathing, it's very affordable, it's very accessible, and it's a pretty good tool. You know, so if you are considering it, we'd love to have you join us, and you can see the discount codes and everything there. So you have level 1, which is the foundational, and then you have the advanced. So level 1 is all recorded, so you could access that immediately. And then the advanced, you have the recording sessions, but then you have the 7 by 2 hour sessions. So we, for example, had a 90-minute session today, and that would be kind of the format of how I teach, typically teasing everything out and breaking it down, and then questions and answers. Okay. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening, or if you're starting your day, enjoy that too. And thanks very much. And any questions, please do reach out to us. Take care. Bye. Bye-bye.